This
Yesterday and what we
conference will
kind
now be recorded.
okay on what we were discussing yesterday and what we kind of missed and all. So we have a project. We said we are developing something like an ASP.NET full framework, and we said after the code is checked in into your repository, after the code is checked in into the Azure DevOps repository, then what is the workflow of that code? So what I did is like I basically opened my Visual Studio to 2019, and then I have written a code, a very basic code, let's say in an ASP.NET full framework. Okay, and we said that the primary difference, or let's say when we are talking about a coding language like anything as such, any coding language a developer kind of writes has certain dependencies to it, and all these dependencies is something which is very essential and very important for the code to run. And we said basically we compared it with an example like to a plugin, like a website has a plugin, so there are multiple dependencies to the code. And what happens during the process of a build is that even before you build the code, you kind of need to restore all your dependencies, and this is called a dependency restoration step. And then we said after the dependencies are restored, then is when you'll go ahead and build your code. And when the build process happens, it will not only build the code, but it will also basically convert all the dependencies into something known as an artifact, or into something known as a language that the server can interpret, the server can really understand. So it is really in a binary format out here. And then we said we had two different things out here, one being in ASP.NET full framework and an and a .NET core. And the primary difference between both of them in in let's say the perspective of a programming language is that ASP.NET full framework is OS dependent, meaning ASP.NET full framework can only be deployed on Windows based operating systems, or only can interact with Windows based operating systems. And when you come to a build pipeline, the primary difference occurs where is that the ASP.NET full framework needs something known as a NuGet.exe in order to go ahead and restore all those dependencies and then build the code. But a .NET Core doesn't need a .NET Core doesn't need a NuGet.exe external client. So it doesn't need a NuGet.exe external client. It is platform independent. It can go on Windows and Linux based operating systems as well. And the restoration procedure is far better than what ASP.NET full framework has. So that is the reason even when you see today, when you click on .NET Core, if you click on .NET, Microsoft is heavily promoting ASP.NET Core as such. Microsoft is heavily promoting ASP.NET Core because a lot of systems today are, a lot of environments today are running both on Linux and Windows. So that is the reason basically you need a programming language that can basically run without a platform, like meaning without an operating system or without the dependency on an operating system, which is great in that way. Now, what we did next is that we said, okay, fine. We said, let's go ahead and create a new build pipeline. And we created a new build pipeline known as an ASP.NET full framework. And we discussed upon the procedures out here, that what is the name of the pipeline. Secondly, what is the agent on which this build is supposed to run? Meaning, why do you need an agent? Very simple. Even in my laptop, if I want to build a solution file, if I want to build a code, I firstly need an operating system, A. Secondly, I need an infrastructure to build it. My infrastructure is my physical laptop, is my physical machine, whereas the software that I need is a Visual Studio. So, what Azure is giving you out here is that Azure is giving you something known as an agent, And this agent is now called as a build agent. And we said there are two types of agent out here. One being Microsoft hosted agent, the other being self-hosted agent, which you can basically create out. And here there are different agents as such. Even in Microsoft hosted, there are different agents here, which are like Mac OS, which are like dependent upon Mac operating systems, Windows, Ubuntu, and everything. And we said we need a Visual Studio 2017 installed on a Windows Server 2016. And what Microsoft does is that in the background, Microsoft just creates a virtual machine, installs Visual Studio 2017 on top of it, and gives it to you, in a readily available format. Now, can you manage this virtual machine? No, not your headache. Is this virtual machine created in an Azure account? No, not at all. I haven't even connected my DevOps with my Azure account yet. Both are two different software as a services available out there. And then we said, okay, fine. This is the build job, and these are the tasks inside it. So since this is an ASP.NET full framework, it needs something like a NuGet.exe basically to be available. So I am firstly doing a NuGet.exe installation, and using that particular NuGet.exe, I am doing a NuGet restore command. I am just doing a NuGet restore command using that particular thing known as a NuGet.exe out there. This is what I am right now doing as such. And I'm saying, okay, fine. This is how go ahead and restore all these dependencies. And then I'm saying, okay, fine. Build your solution. I'm targeting the solution file out here. And once it is built, I am publishing it to a location known as build.artifact staging directory, or also known as my drop location. Okay, here it is saying $build.artifact staging directory and all that stuff. We'll see what that dollar means and all that, all that in the coming classes. Now, this is what an ASP.NET full framework pipeline really looks like. Then, how does an ASP.NET Core look like? Like, what is the difference between this, but the ASP.NET full framework pipeline and an ASP.NET Core pipeline or a .NET Core pipeline? Is that we said we don't need NuGet in order to restore our dependencies. So what I'm gonna do right now is that I'll just take a sample project in my Visual Studio, and we'll just create a new core project out here. Yesterday we did the same for ASP.NET full framework. Now I'm doing the same thing for the ASP.NET core application. And once we have the application ready, we'll check in our code into a new repository. So I'll say, okay, fine, which is great. I'll say create a new project. And here is where I'll select something known as an ASP.NET core application out here. I'll say it is ASP.NET core web app, and I'll say next. And I'll give a name of a project known as .NET core test project. And I'm just selecting a location to save this project out, and I'll say create. So all I'm doing is a project creation right now in my local machine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically open up a new repository out here. So this is the existing repository, which consists of, let's say, the .NET full framework. So I'll basically, I mean, it's okay for me to just use this, the same repository out here, but I cannot do a direct commit on this branch because the branch is protected and the branch has some policies on top of it, which basically denies me in doing a direct commit on top of the branch. So what I'm going to do right now is that I'm going to pull a new branch known as a feature branch. So I'm following the pattern what we are doing right now. So we are not allowing any developer to do a direct commit onto the branch. So I'll say it is feature hyphen ASP.NET ASP.NET Core, and I'll say create. And I also have my code ready with me right now. It's like ASP.NET Core and all that stuff, which is great. Now what I want to do is like I now want to clone this out again using my VS Code. So I am doing a what? I am doing a git clone of what? My feature branch. Let's say open and let's clone this out into a repository. Let's say git repo, let's say new repository, let's say ASP core, and let's say select repository location.
Cannot we clone to Visual Studio?
This is Visual Studio. I mean, you want me to clone into Visual Studio 2019?
Correct. I checked that there is no option, so that's
Okay,
why
I
I'm
mean,
asking.
no, we have the option. This is clone in VS Code, right? This is clone in Visual Studio. You can clone it
Okay.
out, and you can also use something known as a Team Explorer out here in order to connect to your project. See, connect to Azure
Yeah.
DevOps. You can also basically use this in order to connect to your Azure DevOps as such. So you just need to enter your credentials and all that stuff, and you'll be able to connect to it.
Okay.
So you can also use. See, I have all the projects right now. Since I have my account credentials already given in Visual Studio, I see all the projects, and you can also use this particular console in order to clone and all. But the only reason I'm not telling this is because this is a very big software, and we'll be barely using this out. In a DevOps engineer role, we'll be very barely using this out. But if not if you want, but I'll definitely explain how to even clone using this particular console as such. Okay,
Yeah. Thanks.
so I'll just say open. I have like cloned my project out. Right now my project looks something like this. Okay, didn't load really. Okay, fine. Let me take out the branch, which is ASP.NET Core. This is the branch basically that we are working on. So I have like checked out my branch from main. Main did not have anything really. So I am checking the branch out to feature / ASP.NET Core. And here I have the .NET full framework code out here. So what I'm gonna do right now is that I'll go into my Visual Studio, go into the Solution Explorer, and I'll say open where this project is really. So this project is sitting in, let's say, something like repos and all that stuff. So this is the .NET Core project. So let me go ahead, do a right click and copy this out. And let us go into the repository and let's see what was the name of the project. Let's see. Let's say reveal in File Explorer, and I'll just clone this out, or I'll just copy and paste it out. So I am pasting right now. I have the same repository, a different branch, a different feature branch, and I have something known as a .NET Core project out here. Okay, I have something known as a .NET Core project out here. Now what I'm going to do right now is that this is identified that I have so many changes, and I'll stage all these changes right now. So I'll say stage all, and with a commit message, I am gonna push these changes back into my repository. So firstly, I am committing these changes where to my local machine, and after having this committed into my local machine is when I'll basically push it into my branch. So these are all the stage changes, and I'll say this is a commit for ASP.NET Core, and this is done. Now what I'm going to do is like I just push all these changes to this particular branch out here. The branch that I'm working on is what? A feature branch for ASP.NET Core, and I'll say push to that particular branch out there that is sitting in a remote Git repository, which is on Azure DevOps. And this is done. the changes are being pushed. Now if I look at, let's say, my remote git repository, and if I do a refresh out here with this particular screen, I now have the .NET Core also. Now what are we going to do is, following the branching strategy that we have, I will go ahead and raise a pull request to it into something known as a develop branch, because that is where I am taking all this code from. And these are all the files that are actually coming in. It's saying, okay, fine, this is a .NET Core application that is coming in, and all these are files. And I'll say, okay, great, this is good. And it also shows me what my commit is really. And now I'll say, okay, fine, create a pull request. And since this branch has a branching policy, your pull request needs to be approved by someone. So in my case, let's say a technical lead wants to approve this. So a technical lead comes here, checks all these things out, and says, okay, fine, these are great, these are good. And he'll say, okay, fine, let me approve this out. And once approved, you can complete your PR merge and delete the feature branch out there. And this is done. Your pull request is merged into the develop branch of your repository, and your main branch is still empty. So let's go to the develop branch. And this is where my project really is in. This is where my project really is in, which is telling that, okay, fine, this is the ASP.NET Core application. Now what I want to do is create a pipeline for ASP.NET Core. Till now we were working with ASP.NET Full Framework, where we said this is how our pipeline really looks like. And we said we need something like a NuGet installer, which gives you the NuGet.exe, and then you run a command called NuGet restore to restore all your dependencies. And we discussed that when NuGet restore runs, it will kind of go and hit a particular portal called as NuGet.org, download all the packages from there, make it readily available for you, and then do a build solution out here. And we are using something known as a Visual Studio in order to build our solution. So this particular Visual Studio is installed, let's say, on the agent machine, and then we are publishing the artifact out here. So these are the steps that we are doing in, let's say, an ASP.NET Full framework. Can I use the same thing for an ASP.NET Core as such? No, not really, because if I end up using the same thing out there, it will fail, because ASP.NET Core doesn't need a NuGet, doesn't need a NuGet restoration at all. So what I'm going to do right now is that I will create a new build pipeline, and I'll say it's a new pipeline, and I'll say user classic editor, and I'll say fine, this is the repository that I'm working on, and my code is in where? It's in the develop branch of the repository, and I'll say continue. And now yesterday, when you guys remember, right, we selected this particular template. We selected this particular template called ASP.NET Web Application because our code was in ASP.NET. Now what I'm going to do is I'll just come down and scroll here, and you have a readily available template for ASP.NET Core. You have a readily available template for something known as an ASP.NET Core. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm just going to apply this out, and it's going to give me a sample pipeline out here telling this is a .NET Core as such. So let me say this is an ASP.NET Core application, and the same thing again, I will say the agent specification is, let's say, Windows Server 2016, and here it's saying, okay, fine, what is the project that you want to target? So let me close this out and let's see. It's saying I am targeting something known as a CS project. It's telling, okay, fine, I am targeting something known as a CS project out here. Meaning, if you look at your code, inside this particular folder, you have something known as a solution file. And inside this particular folder, okay, what happened is this one. Okay, let's refresh this out. Okay, great. Inside this particular folder, you have something known as a project file. So two things out here. You have a solution, you can target your solution. You have a project, you can also target your project. Any which ways works fine with me. So I'll take my solution file. I'll say this is where my solution is actually sitting in, and I'll go into my pipeline and I'll say it is not the project, but rather it's a solution that you want to target out. And I'm just giving the path. I am just giving the path of my solution. How am I giving it? I'm clicking on the solution file, going on top of here, and just taking a path out here. So it's telling, okay, fine, you have a folder called .NET, something like this. And then under that, you have something known as a .NET Core solution, something like this. So you have a folder, and under this particular folder, you have a solution file. So I want you to target it out. So I'll say great, fine, good. You're targeting the solution file. And then this is again the same thing which we did yesterday, is that it's asking you for the project, the repository, the branch. And what are all these? We'll look into that. And now you have the name, you have the name of the agent job that is being performed. So I'll say this is build ASP.NET application or ASP core application. And here, if you see the difference between an ASP.NET full framework and an ASP.NET core application, you are still doing a restoration, you're still doing a build, but you're not doing a NuGet restore. Rather, you're doing a .NET restore, meaning you are just doing a command called .NET.exe and then space restore. Meaning what this command does, or what basically the machine has, is that the machine that you're selecting has something known as a .NET SDK, which is something known as a .NET software development kit. And this .NET SDK will give you something known as a .NET.exe, which doesn't need a NuGet.exe. In here, you do not get a software development kit, you get a bare minimal software, and that's the reason you are depending upon an external client called NuGet.exe. Out here, it doesn't need a NuGet.exe because .NET has its own capability to go ahead and restore, to go ahead and build, to go ahead and test, publish, and then publish the artifact. So this is what it's doing. It's doing a .NET restore firstly. So I'm just using the same .NET core task in order to run a command called restore. I'm again using the same .NET task in order to run a command called build, which is building my entire solution. And then if you have any test cases written, you can test it out. If you don't, you can just remove this out. As for now, I am just removing it out. Finally, whatever projects were built, all these projects are getting published into something known as a build.artifact staging directory, which is the drop location basically that I do have. And finally, you have a step to just take every artifact that is there and publish it out into something known as a drop location. This is what I am right now doing out here, guys. Guys, any questions till here? Anything till here?
Why we should took ASP.NET Core again?
I'm sorry, I didn't get you, Akila.
Why we should took ASP.NET Core again from the Visual Studio Code?
Because I did not have an ASP.NET core application at all. Like all I had was an ASP.NET full framework. So right now I am just building an ASP.NET core application and then pushing it back into my repository. So to start with, when I started with, I did not have an ASP.NET core at all. I just had a full framework. So full framework is a bit different from a core. So now if you see into my repository, I have two different projects out here. One is a .NET Core test project. The other is a web application full framework project. And this is an ASP.NET full framework. And this is an ASP.NET Core application. So that is the reason I went ahead and pushed all the code into my repository back again. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes.
Can we use same pipeline for different projects of respective code?
You can, but see, when you're talking about projects again, right? So the structure follows something like this. When a developer creates a project, you will have a solution file, okay, the SLN file, under which you can have multiple CS project files. You will have multiple CS project files. And what will happen is that the developers will mention all the CS project files in the solution. Now, since I have only one CS project file out here, it is just taking this out. And see, even the path is something like .NET something / .NET .cs proj. Now, when you have multiple projects out here, like you have one project called A, you have another CS project called B, which is like a bit different, and you want to, basically target all these things out. What would the developer do out here is that all the projects that are falling under the solution are mentioned in this solution file. Are mentioned in the solution file. Like at line number 6, I have one particular project. At line number 7, I'll have the other. Line number 8, I'll have the other, and all that stuff. So how many other projects that the developer basically gives you, you can just bundle it up and target your solution file while building it. That's the reason I targeted my solution file to begin with. So I bundled everything up and I'm targeting my solution file. But if you want to, let's say, target individual projects, you don't want to build everything inside it because not all is really complete. You only want to target individual CS proj files out here. You can go inside this folder, locate your CS project file, and target this out in your pipeline. So instead of giving, let's say, so not this one, instead of, let's say, giving the solution file, you can target a CS project file as such. So this is the application development, meaning this is how the applications are really developed. So you can either target, like in most likely you will be targeting something like a solution file because you want to build all the projects inside that particular project or inside that particular solution. And once you target the solution, everything that is mentioned in the solution, every CS proj file that is mentioned in the solution will get targeted intrinsically. So internally, this will target every CS project file out here. All they need or all the developer needs to do is just mention or just take a reference to that particular CS project file in your solution. That's it. So that is a difference between targeting a solution versus targeting a CS project. Does that answer your question, Sanjay?
Yes. Real time, we can
Mhm.
use same pipeline for different projects, or they will create different pipelines for each project
So
in real time.
let's say in my case, I have a project which has multiple applications that are coming out of it. Like we have like tens and we have like about 10 to 12 applications that are coming out of the project, and all these 10 and 12 projects basically together give a functionality to me. So we have different pipelines for each and every project as such, because each and every team needs a different pipeline. Each and every team basically has a different demand out there. So it again completely depends upon what kind of a project are you really working for. Like let's say if they want to basically give one single pipeline and target just the solution file, you can also do that. Or let's say if you want to divide a project A from project B, you can have multiple pipelines. So I have worked with projects that just had one single pipeline to do all the job. I'm working with a project which is doing like 10 different pipelines to do 10 different jobs out there. So it depends completely on, let's say, the project that you're going into.
Okay. When they are giving,
Mhm.
will they define we want single pipeline or a dedicated pipeline
So that is
when they
again,
request?
see, exactly. So that is again the work of a DevOps engineer to identify that. Meaning, if let's say they're giving you 10 different projects and they say, you know what, these are independent of each other, then you will go for single pipelines for each. And when they give you just one solution file and say, you know what, there are like about 10 projects inside the same solution file, and I want you to build everything at one go. then you can just have one pipeline and just target the solution file as such. So all they would say is that, whether we want it independently or whether we want it clubbed together, according to which you can take a call on, what kind of a pipeline that you want to design.
Okay. Yeah.
So any further questions, guys, before we move forward here? Okay, so what I'm doing right now is that, okay, I have like named all my applications and etc. I have named my pipeline. I'll just save my pipeline with the same name, and now I'll do a queue of my pipeline. So I can basically trigger my pipeline, and I'll say, okay, fine, this is a manual queue of my pipeline. I'm selecting the agent specification and I'm saying run. And now this will basically trigger a pipeline out here telling that, okay, fine, let me start the job, and let me basically, the first step of the job is to acquire an agent from the cloud. Since you are dependent upon, let's say, a Microsoft hosted agent, what really happens out here is that you'll need to wait for some time until Microsoft assigns you a particular virtual machine. So in here, if you see, Microsoft has assigned you a virtual machine with the name FV something like this. You do not absolutely have no control with it. Like you do not have a control at all, on the virtual machine that you're kind of getting out here. All you have a control is to just tell Microsoft that, hey, you know what? I am building an application for Windows, so I need a Visual Studio plus I just need a Windows Server 2016 or 2019 or whichever is the latest. Can you please give that to me? So Microsoft will assign a server according to it. And the second thing, what the server would do is like, even if I need to build, let's say, an application on my local machine, that application should be there somewhere in my, in my local machine, on the hard drive of my local machine. Otherwise, it will not build, right? So that's the reason the second step out here, what it's trying to do is that, it's trying to go ahead and say, okay, fine, this is the code. I'll just take the entire code and I'll just download the entire code basically into or on top of the virtual machine or on top of the agent that just got provided. So I'm just downloading all my code on top of the agent and then doing a restoration procedure, then doing a build, and then doing a publish. And yes, we do have an error telling that something like this and all. We'll see what the error really is. Non-zero exit. Fine. We'll see what the error later. And then it says, okay, fine. Once you're, published out this one, you will have like, like one particular file that is coming out here. And it will say, okay, fine. This is the artifact that got published. And this is the .NET core.zip is what I'm really looking at. And if you download the zip like we did yesterday, you will see all the DLLs basically that is getting built. You'll see all something known as a DLL or a 0 and 1 basically that is like, getting published out there. So this is what it is trying to do. And this error basically that we get here while, publishing it out is like a very known error with Microsoft. Like there is some issues with, let's say, their agents out there. And it's a very, very known error out here telling that, what, okay, fine, nothing to do. Let's see what it's trying to do. Let's see. It's not found. Okay. Import declaration is something like this. On the disk. Okay. So it's trying to look for a project which is not there on that particular machine. So we can exclude this particular thing called Microsoft Web Application Targets or something like that. But again, this is like a known issue with, Microsoft hosted agents out there, which, kind of gives you all these errors and all that stuff. And all you need to do when you, kind of get this error is like, firstly, understand what the error is. See, for example, in my case, it's telling it failed with something called an exit code 1. But even before that, this is where the error is actually coming in. It's saying the imported project or something like that was not found, so I couldn't really restore it and all that stuff. But I don't really also need this step here. You can also disable this out. The main step that I'm looking out here is something known as a publish artifact. So once the artifacts are published, you can now go ahead and start using this artifacts out here in the form of the build pipeline out here. I mean in the form of, let's say, the artifacts out here, and you can make use of this artifact and basically give it a release. Now how you would give it a release, how do you use this artifact, we'll look at, we'll look into that. We'll look into how you basically give a release and all that stuff. But until here, guys, until here, are you all comfortable? Like anything that you want me to revisit, anything basically that you're not comfortable and want me to revisit out there? Anything, guys?
Today we did the web application framework to create the virtual machine, right? But
Hmm.
here, as .NET Core, what did create then in the folder DLL?
It just created, let's say, the binaries out there. Like if you look at the folder right now that got published out here, and if I just do download this particular folder and extract this out, and just say extract this out, it just extracted and it gave me all the DLLs out here. That's it. And inside this you will have all the projects and all that stuff. So this is the same thing what you're going to get when you build out, let's say, using your local machine. If I do a build even here, it's going to give me the same thing. Like it's going to literally give me the same thing out here. Like after this gets built, I can also show you that. So let's allow this a minute to build it out. And if I go into the folder, right, where it got built, you'll see the same applications out here. Like I've just extracted here, that's the reason you're getting it in this way. You'll get the same thing out here. So once this is built, you can just check that out and it'll be the same thing out here. So what I got after a build is all the DLL. Now what I'm going to do with that DLL is, yes, definitely we are going to discuss about it, and as to what I am really going to do with the DLL and all that stuff. That is something that we'll kind of discuss in, let's say, the coming classes on what do you do with, let's say, the artifact. How do you manage your artifacts, and how do you basically manage the life cycle of your artifact and etc. So if I go here and if I, let's say, basically go into this particular folder, it's literally the same thing. It's the same thing what I got here. It's every folder, everything that I got here, and all the stuff basically is getting saved in something known as a debug and all that stuff. So I'm just comparing as to how the artifact is when it gets built on the cloud versus the local. That's the only two things basically that I'm like looking at. Does that answer your question, Akila?
Okay, it is for binary, right then?
Yes, it is for the binary. Like the entire process of the build is itself, let's say, to convert the project from a high level language to a very low level language where the server can really understand it out.
And the web application for virtual machine creation.
Uh, Sorry, which virtual machine creation that you're talking about? I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Yesterday we created the
Hmm.
web application, right? So we
Right.
extracted, right? DLLs
Hmm.
came. So it is
Hmm.
for VMware. And you told
It
that
is for deploying. Like, mhm. Yeah, I mean, it is that particular application, right? You just take that application, like when you build this out, right, out here, you're getting the DLL. The second thing that you do is just publish it out on a web application. So I'm just building it out on the cloud, and I've just got a folder, or I just got a zip file, and I'll take this zip file. The next thing that I'll do, I'll just publish it out on the application.
okay.
Does it answer your question? Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, now it's still a manual procedure out here. It's still, let's say, a very manual procedure out here where I'm going to each and every individual pipeline and I'm saying, you know what, I want to build this particular pipeline. I will say, okay, fine, I'll just come here and I'll say, build this particular pipeline out, and I'm saying run pipeline. And I'm saying running this pipeline, I'm basically targeting, let's say, the project files and the solution files and etc. But this doesn't really fulfill my need to give a completely automated environment. And in a completely automated environment, I need something like as and when the developer checks in the code from his laptop to the cloud, meaning to Azure DevOps, to let's say the dev.azure.com and into the Azure repository, I automatically want the build pipeline to trigger. I automatically want the build pipeline to trigger without a manual intervention and give an artifact at the end. Give something known as an artifact at the end. Because this is truly automation for me. So this is the procedure what I really want to achieve. Can you really achieve? Yes. Now what we are doing is a integration pipeline or a build pipeline. But when you automate this, this is called as continuous integration pipeline, which is CI. So how do you then automate this out? Now in my case, I have two different things that are going out here. One being .NET and the other being .NET Core out here. So whenever someone commits something or whenever someone does any change, let's say into any of the application, I want this pipeline to get triggered. I want this particular pipeline, which is an ASP.NET Full Framework pipeline, to get triggered. So what I'll do here, and I'll say edit, and under the triggers, okay, edit, and then you have tasks, variables, and triggers. Under the triggers, I'll say enable continuous integration, and I'll say whenever you have a commit onto the develop branch, whenever you have a commit onto the develop branch, please go ahead and trigger it out. I'll say save, and I'll just basically have enabled the continuous integration out here. And what I'll do right now is I'll come to my project file. I'll go into the .NET Full Framework application, or I can also go into the README file out here. And firstly, I cannot do a direct commit out here. I need a feature branch. So let me pull up a feature branch, and I'll say feature / sample commit. I'll say create. And as and when this happens, I'll say edit. And I'll say this is a sample commit to test my CI. Test the continuous integration, and I'll say commit out. I'll say commit. And did a pipeline get triggered right now? No, not really. Because all these commits are actually going, let's say, into your feature branch. And the continuous integration is set to trigger whenever the develop branch is updated. So what I'll do right now is I'll merge my PR into the develop branch. And I'll say create this out. I'll say approve, and I'll say complete to complete the entire merge. As and when the merge is complete, the develop branch gets updated. As and when the develop branch got updated, it triggered another build just now. So I am not at all being involved in this process. I don't want a human intervention in this process completely. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever, let's say, someone commits something onto your develop branch, I need the continuous integration pipeline to trigger automatically and produce an artifact out to me. This pipeline will trigger, it'll, do a .NET restore without any human intervention, and at the end, it's going to give you an artifact or the binaries so that you can use it at a later point in time. Now, this process is called as a continuous integration process. where you don't need a manual intervention out there. Again, how did I enable it? I came into my pipeline. I said edit my pipeline, and I came into this particular pipeline out here, and I said, okay, fine, go to the triggers, and I said enable continuous integration. And I said, okay, fine, this is the continuous integration. Please go ahead and enable this out. And that's when it went ahead and triggered the build. Okay, now there is one small issue out here, is that even if a developer comes in and does something to, let's say, the .NET Core project, even they, let's say, do some editing in the .NET Core project, it will end up triggering the .NET Full Framework pipeline. Because the .NET Full Framework pipeline is set to continuous integration whenever the develop branch is triggered. But I don't want this. I want to slightly tweak it. I want to say that whenever someone commits into the .NET Core or the .NET Full Framework project of the development pipe or of the development branch, I want this pipeline to get triggered. Only when someone does a change to these files, only when someone does a change to this particular files, for which you have something known as a path filter. You have two things out here. One being a branch filter, the other being something known as a path filter. Under a path filter, you can say only if someone goes ahead and triggers this particular, or if only someone goes ahead and comes into this particular branch out here, or this particular path out here, is when I want you to trigger a build. I'm saying, okay, fine, this is web application framework and everything inside web application framework. Like everything inside a folder called a web application framework, anything inside this folder called a web application framework. And how am I specifying it's anything? I'll give a wildcard. I'm saying anything under this, please go ahead and trigger a build. Now what's going to happen is that the build won't get triggered while I edit this MD file, I readme.md file. The build will only get triggered while someone does a change into the web application framework. Because this particular pipeline is for a full framework, right? But your repository has both full framework and a .NET core project also. When someone does a change to the .NET core project, I don't want the full framework to get triggered. So I am including something known as a path filter out here. So you have two things out here. One called a branch filter. You can specify multiple branches. You can say even if a release branch is involved, also go ahead and give a filter for me. And you can involve something known as a path filter, where you can say basically that multiple paths being involved and multiple files being involved, and only if that particular path is updated, only then go ahead and give me a particular continuous integration pipeline. So again, whenever developer checks in a code, no manual intervention from now, it will directly go ahead, and whenever the develop branch is updated, it will directly go ahead and, let's say, build the code out here. I mean, it will directly go ahead and, let's say, trigger the build pipeline and give you the artifact at the end. This is how the entire task is actually going to work, or this is how the entire workflow is actually going to flow. Any questions with this, guys? Anything with this? Are you all able to
Where can
follow this, guys? Okay, sorry, Chandra, go ahead.
yeah, where can we check the artifacts after the after I mean continuous integration is complete?
Okay, so you'll have to go into this particular pipeline out here. Like after the pipeline is done, triggering, let's go to the pipeline. Like this pipeline is done, right? So just go to that particular pipeline, and this is the second run. What happened? And this is the artifacts. This is how it'll get published. And this is the zip file basically that I'm interested into. So again, pipelines, the run of a pipeline, like the second run right now that I'm looking at, and these are the artifacts. It's called one published artifact out here, and into the drop in here is where you find the artifact. Is that okay, Chandra?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Any more questions with this one, guys?
So in this, actually,
Hmm?
there are 10 developers are there. They are
Hmm.
every time they are doing some commits. Every time this
Okay.
pipeline is executing. So
Hmm.
this is like it's already triggered and another is committed and again it will start like that. It happens, right?
Hmm.
There is any
Yes.
timely, I mean, timely triggering this job.
Exactly. That's a very good question. So what Srikanth is asking is that let's say I have 10 developers and 10 developers are working on the same thing, and every time a developer commits, the pipeline gets triggered. But I don't want something like that. Let's say my developers are working from 9 to 5 and my developers have completed their work by 5, and now I want the pipeline to get triggered because it will basically, when now it builds, it will just build one time and it will take all the commits that went in and then it will build it out. Like, can I do that? Yes, of course you can do that. If you have a requirement, something like that, you can definitely do that by doing something known as schedule run. So I'll edit my pipeline again and go to the triggers and disable the continuous integration, and I can add a schedule. I can say it should trigger from Monday to Friday because that's the working hour at around 5 p.m. IST. So 5 is like 17, so 17 IST. And I can again give a branch filter and also a path filter out here. And I can just save it out. Now your pipeline is not a continuous integration pipeline, but your pipeline is a scheduled pipeline. Is actually a scheduled run pipeline. So developers are working from 9 to 5. They've like checked in everything. They've done a lot of development. And every time they check in, I don't want the pipeline to run. I just want the pipeline to run, once and just build everything out, which is a good approach in, certain cases where say it's certainly a good approach in order to, let's say, reduce the pipeline runs in order to avoid all that stuff. And I can save this out. And this is going to only run at, let's say, 5 every day and avoid the run on Saturday and Sunday. This is how it can, this is how we can also schedule it out there to, run on a schedule. Does that answer your question, Srikanth?
Yeah, Kiran. And one more thing,
Mhm.
in real-time environment, which one will be the best procedure? Best
So again,
approach, I mean.
mhm. So again, it
Best
depends upon the
approach.
kind. Yeah, it depends upon the kind of development activity that you're actually, trying to look at. Let's say, in some cases, right, the developers would want to check in their code. The developer will basically, do some changes, want to check in their code, and after immediately checking their code, right, within like 1 hour, they want to test their changes on the environment, meaning they want to test their changes on Azure. In that case, I would suggest going for a continuous integration, which will basically give the developer, like a readily available artifact, and we can take that artifact and then we can deploy it on Azure, and the changes can be tested, and the QA team can be involved. Like this is, let's say, a continuous development process. But there are cases where, let's say, your organization is not that big. You do not want to take like, a frequent developments or frequent builds out there. You just want one build at the end of a day. You can go for a schedule. So in the first case scenario, I will go for a continuous integration where my changes needs to be continuously tested throughout the day. And in the second case where, let's say, you do not want your changes to be continuously tested, just like you just want to release it like once in a day and just see how it is, you can go for a scheduled run in the second case. Now usually second case happens when, let's say, the organization is a bit small, like startup companies and etc. The first case happens a lot in, let's say, MNC companies where you have two different teams, one being an offshore team, the other being an onshore team. So offshore team is something like, let's say, in India where, let's say, we all guys, let's say, develop things out, test it out, and by the end of a shift we hand over the entire work to the onshore team where the US team comes in and takes all that workload. So in that particular case, I want, let's say, a continuous integration to happen where the continuous, where they are like, continuously delivering things out and continuously testing it out and then hand over the work to, let's say, the, the onshore team as such. So in that cases, I will go for a continuous integration. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Kiran. But what happens if a
Mm-hmm.
pipeline job is triggered? Like
Mm-hmm.
it is takes a lot of time to complete it. So
Exactly. Mhm. Mhm.
in between some other developers want to try their means changes. It
Mhm.
will takes a lot of time. Continuously, it is deploying throughout the day.
Exactly. It does take a lot of time.
It's a problem creates right
Mhm.
for the developers who want to test their development.
Exactly. Very well point made. Uh, I'm getting a bit of echo. Shrikant, can you please go on mute? Thank you so much. So very well point made. Yes, that is true. That what Shrikant is trying to tell is that, you know what, this particular repository that we are using out here, it's just not for one developer. It's like tens and, you know, like hundreds of developers who are working on this. And each and every time someone commits, the development will happen, but they'll have to wait until the commit is complete. Like meaning until the further, until the before development is complete, until the before pipeline is complete. Like meaning, I first put a commit out here, like I'm the developer one, and I basically run the pipeline. And a developer two comes into picture, and even he commits it out. So two parallel commits out here. So what happens is that the job gets queued. Like each and every job, whenever I commit it, it gets queued and it'll bundle up. So let's imagine this is my first one and this is the second. The first one is running, the second one is queued. Because the first one has to complete, the second one has to get triggered. So how many jobs, you know, can you really wait for on a day? Like if you do a continuous integration, how many developers will actually wait for one particular day? But in real time, it doesn't actually happen that way. Because I will not be using a Microsoft hosted agent for if my development activities are continuous throughout the day and my organization growth potential is a lot, or my organization development strategy is a lot, then I'll be using something known as a self-hosted agent. In a self-hosted agent, I will now create my virtual machines in Azure portal. I will install something known as an Azure DevOps agent on top of it, and then use it as my infrastructure here. So what happens now is parallel developments can go together. For the second developer doesn't have to wait for the first build to complete. Developmental activities can take parallel shapes out here. So that's what happens really, Srikant. So people will not really wait out there. Rather, in that scenario, you'll be going for a self-hosted agent versus an Azure hosted agent. Does that answer your question, Srikant?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's what happens, and we'll also see how do you create, you know, self-hosted agent and etc. And how do you use the self-hosted agent, of course. So that's what we'll be seeing, let's say, in the coming classes. So all that we are discussing right now, I'll make sure that we revise it in, you know, the starting of the class, because this is going to be like very, very important, guys. Like all the Azure DevOps, what we are doing out here is something that, you know, you'll be definitely doing, let's say, in your job profile as an Azure DevOps engineer. So all these, you know, strategies, everything that we are discussing out here will certainly help you all out, let's say, to basically, you know, successfully, you know, carry on with your job. So any questions till now, guys? Anything?
And when we edit the change only, it will trigger.
Mhm. When we edit, yes, whenever your develop branch, right? Whenever your develop branch is updated, it's going to get triggered.
So it
Because
will automatically run. Yeah.
right now I'm running on a schedule. But if I delete the schedule and basically do a continuous integration, so yes, in this case, whenever the develop branch is updated, it will automatically run.
Yeah.
So you don't need a manual intervention. I don't need to come here and do a queue. Okay. Any more questions with this one, guys?
but it's little confusing.
It will just take a little bit of time to get this understanding, but what I'll make sure is that every day we recap things out in order to understand how the workflow is actually going on. And once you are comfortable, only then we'll move into, let's say, the open source. Okay, Akila?
Okay.
But please, my request is like, please go through the videos and please try doing this on your own. And then let me know if you'll, kind of have any questions out there and etc. We can have discussion sessions if, let's say, if y'all need on this, on top of this one. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more questions? Apart from that, apart from those.
Kiran, can you please show me how to give that credentials, username
Okay,
and password if possible?
sure. Actually, as of now, my Visual Studio Code actually has those out. But let me see if I can, show you here. Let's say new terminal. And what I want you to do is, Ali, is that change this from PowerShell to, let's say, Git Bash. And you have a Git command in order to set it out. Now, this is your command, Ali. This is for username and this is for the email ID. These are the two things that I want you to try out. It's git
Okay.
config -- global and then user.name and then the name. Okay. Out here, this is what you need to type. And then git config -- global user.email and then your email ID. These are the two things basically that I want you to, kind of set out. I can also, send you across the entire documentation and also these commands out here. Like I'll just send it like in the chat window right now.
Okay.
And also this one. So you can do it either in git bash out here, or you can change this to git bash, or you can, let's say, use a terminal like command prompt. Even in command prompt it works. Even in the CMD window it kind of works out, because once you have the git installed, right, the command prompt will also identify that this is a git command that is coming into picture. So please refer to
Oh,
this one out. Like this is the syntax. It's like git config -- global user.name space in quotes the name and the first name and the last name if you wish to give that way. And then for setting your email, it is git config -- global user.email and then the email ID.
okay. I'll try that.
Yeah, just give it a try and let me know if you still get any error out there. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And guys, Ali, if you still get any error, just try to ping in the group and just try to make sure to just ask the folks out here. And guys, please help out Ali if he needs any help out. And the reason why I'm not telling this to y'all upfront is that I want y'all to try doing Google search out here, because in a day we get like tens and thousands of issues, guys. Like literally there are like a lot of issues basically that we keep getting out. So until and unless you don't Google it out, and until and unless you don't understand the issue, you will not be able to resolve it out. So I want you all to Google. I want you all to, let's say, uh, you know, uh, go forward with, let's say, the team spirit out here, so that the same thing can be carry forwarded when you kind of go and work in the organization where you are like kind of self-reliant on your own self. So that is something that I really I'm trying to promote out there, because that's going to be like the cornerstone for anything. Again, technically sound, yes, you need to have like technically the technical capabilities, you need to have them, but along with that you also need to know how to basically interact with people, how to basically send across emails and etc. How do you basically develop that soft skills and all those stuff, because even that's going to play a lot of factor for your career, let's say, in any industry as such. So if anyone is like genuinely facing issues with, let's say, sending across emails or anything like that, let me know. I'll also help with that, telling how do you interact with how do you interact with the team and all that, etc. And one more thing, speaking about, let's say, the jobs and etc., like the calls are very good right now, guys. So if anyone, is genuinely looking for, let's say, a job help or a job support or something like that, I would suggest you all to go ahead and roll out the resumes right now, because we are done with Azure. We are like done with a good amount of part with Azure, and we have started with Azure DevOps. So it's the right time to go ahead and, let's say, roll out your resumes. But if you're someone who's like, trying to give your own interviews, I would suggest you to wait for about, let's say, the next 5 or 6 days, like a week from now, so that we can, go a bit deep into the Azure DevOps, and then you can, start giving the interviews. So this is the plan. So anyone who wants to, let's say, go ahead and right away, take an interview support and etc. and give the interview, you can roll out your resume. Or if someone, you are someone, if you want to give your own interviews, then I would suggest you to, let's say, wait for about 5 or 6 days and then go ahead and roll out your resume. So any questions with anything, guys?
Is this
Kiran
enough?
Sanjay here.
The Azure course is enough to write 104 exam?
Okay, sorry, that's Kiran. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So yes, Kiran, the course for Azure is definitely sufficient to go ahead and write 104 examination. But I would also suggest you to visit the Microsoft documentation for it, because you'll have to do a lot of practice and all. Because see, when you talk about an exam, one specific thing, right? Even for me to go ahead and write a Microsoft examination, I'll have to basically revisit the entire documentations and see what is the examination pattern. So I would suggest you to see what the examination pattern is, how the questions are coming, and then accordingly prepare and then give it out.
Okay.
And I had another question from Sanjay, I believe.
Yeah, I have experience in Windows and VMware, so I can go in this DevOps also, right? With that experience.
Yes, exactly. I mean, see, the thing is that DevOps right now or cloud right now is really open out there. Like, there is really not a particular skill set that they are really looking for, because there is a lot of, meaning, believe me, I basically sit on a lot of interviews on a daily basis, and we try to look for a lot of skill out there. But there is literally a lot of need for, let's say, engineers from cloud. So all we kind of look is that, is a candidate okay with, let's say, basics of cloud, and can we train that particular candidate? So the criteria here is that, yes, definitely, if you have a Windows background, definitely an added advantage. If you don't have it, you're definitely not, let's say, something who's like a disadvantage and etc. You basically can, have an equal chance out there, in the industry there. So all you need is, like, a bit of skill to understand what's really going out there, and basically an appetite to learn. That's those are just the two things basically that you would require.
Okay, sure.
And
Can we
Shrikant, I
use
believe you
ARM
had a question.
templates and PowerShells in Azure DevOps?
Yes,
Like to
very
deploy?
good question. Yes, we can
Yeah.
definitely use them. We are going to use them when we are building the infrastructure, and when we build the infrastructure, or when we create the infrastructure using ARM templates and PowerShell scripting along with Azure DevOps. It's called infrastructure as a code. So we will also do a demo on how it is done. We will firstly manually create it on the portal, like, a web app, and then deploy the code using the release pipeline. And then we will see how to automate even the infrastructure creation. And that is where we play a very, very major role, guys. Like, infrastructure creation using the Azure DevOps pipeline is where we guys come into picture. So we will also see that. Any further questions I can take, guys? Shrikant, I think you had a question. Yes, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Regarding the containers, how we are going to look into these containers and how
So
much
what I'm gonna do as of now, yeah, sure.
okay,
Please go ahead. Please complete the question.
yeah, how much we can get a training on containers? Either Docker or Kubernetes.
Kubernetes, isn't it? So what we are going to do as of now, the plan is something like this. So as and when we finish Azure DevOps, we are going to look into the same thing like open sources, like Terraforms, Jenkins, and etc. And then is where we are going to go into containerization. So what I am going to give you is not, let's say, a pure form of container. Rather, we are going to cover something known as an Azure Container Registry, which is, let's say, getting developed in parallel to a Docker Hub. And we are going to look into something known as an Azure Kubernetes cluster. So on the container end, I would say it would be, let's say, from basic to intermediate, not really an advanced level like we are doing with Azure DevOps. Because again, if we need to go into containerization, that's again, hold together like about 30-day class. That's going to be that big stretch, because we will have to start from the very basics of Linux and understand what containerization is and understand what Docker is and etc. And then go ahead in that way. But for this course, we are cutting it down to something known as Azure Container Registry and Azure Kubernetes Cluster, or Azure Kubernetes Services, which is, let's say, a platform managed service by Microsoft. And we are going to see how can you orchestrate your containers using Kubernetes cluster and etc. So that's something that we are definitely going to see. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes. So what is the expectation in the interviews with the containerization?
So
We
even Mhm. So even in, let's say, on an interview perspective, using a containerization, especially when you're coming from an Azure DevOps background, it's morely with, let's say, the Azure Container Registry and the Azure Kubernetes services that is out there. And as of now, believe me, there are a lot of products right now which are starting to move from a monolithic architecture to something known as a microservices right now, and they're planning to leverage containers. So even the industry today, I would say, is in an intermediate phase right now, where they are not expecting a very high knowledge on containerization, because that is something that you're not getting at this point. That's a skill that is not something that you're not getting at this point. But they're looking for someone who knows what containers are, who has a bit of hands-on on what containers really are and what Kubernetes really is. And then goes the product trainings and all that stuff. So again, if we have to delve into that area, that's again a big vast ocean out there, because uh, Docker itself is like a very big concept as such. And then you have Kubernetes, and inside Kubernetes you have something like Helm charts and all that stuff. So what we are going to do is firstly understand the very basics of what containerization is, and then understand how can you orchestrate containers using, let's say, something like Kubernetes cluster. And interview expectation, let's say, for a 4 or 5 year profile, something like an understanding of what of what really Docker is, and can you, let's say, create something like an Azure Kubernetes service and then orchestrate the containers that you're creating, and can you do a CI/CD on the Azure Kubernetes cluster, can you use Azure DevOps pipeline. That's the expectation out there in the industry as today. Does it answer your question, or do you have any follow-up with that?
yes, yes.
Anything else apart from this, guys?
It will probably take this month, right, to complete the whole syllabus.
You mean the October? Yes. Like, I am looking at that particular calendar right now. Since we are in Azure DevOps, I would need another solid 5 working days for us to, or 5 to 7 working days for us to cover, let's say, the Azure DevOps part of it, and then probably another week, let's say, for open sources, and then 3 or 4 days basically for Dockers and Kubernetes. So I'm looking somewhere a fortnight, like a 15 days basically from now, 15 or 20 days basically from now, is to to cover the entire thing.
Okay.
Can we cover shell script as well?
No, we are not covering shell script at all. Shell scripting, again, Linux, that's again a big vast ocean there. So that's something that we are not going to cover here. Anything else, guys? Okay, then if there are no further questions, then I'm good to close the session for today, guys. And we'll meet the same time tomorrow, and we'll discuss more on Azure DevOps and a lot of things basically. with Azure DevOps with the CI pipelines, and we'll slowly move into the continuous deployment pipeline as well. Have a great day ahead, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.